Hello Africa, welcome to AAU Talks on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa, and it is brought to you by the Association of African Universities. My name is Isabella Tetteh Ahinakwa. Our topic for today's discussion is renewable energy for Africa's development. And when we talk about energy, we all know that Africa faces severe energy scarcity, and this obviously hinders the development of a country or a continent as a whole. Joining me on this discussion is Mr. Ronnie Ssejuko, who happens to be a renewable energy specialist in Uganda. Please stay with me as we go for a quick break, and when we come back, we will start with the discussion. Stay tuned. You're welcome back. This is AAU Talks and my name is Isabella Tetteh Ahinakwa. If you just joined, you can follow this discussion on our social media platforms at Association of African Universities on Facebook and YouTube, and our dedicated website at tv.aau.org. As I mentioned earlier, I will be discussing with Mr. Ronnie Ssejuko, a renewable energy specialist in Uganda, on renewable energy for Africa's development. Hello, Mr. Ronnie. Welcome to AAU Talks. How are you doing, and how is this pandemic treating you and the people of Uganda?
Thank you very much, the AAU TV, for hosting me. My name is Ronnie Ssejuko, and I'm working with Peak Energy Uganda, a renewable energy company, and general engineering consultancy. Yes, the global COVID-19 pandemic has, like the rest of the world, has affected us in the country as well, because you realize that most of the economies, ranging from the agriculture, the education, all the different sectors which run the country have been affected, especially looking at the time when we first had the initial lockdowns early this year, around March, because it was something new and no one expected it. It really found so many of us unprepared, and really we were affected. But as time went on, we are trying to catch up, and hopefully with the different measures the government and the global health industry has put forward, we are hoping to come back to normal.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, that's what I can say.
Okay, so to get started, you've already introduced yourself, but can you please tell us a bit about your field as a specialist in energy? In the energy. Can you tell us more about your field?
Yes, a consultant, renewable energy. My bias is in, because when I say energy is big, is a bulk of technologies, but when I look at my focus area is in the renewables. And again, because renewable is broad, I'll go and look at my concrete focus, which is bioenergy. But as a company, because it's a company made up of different departments and different personnel, teams of different professionals, we do generally a lot of work in the energy industry. But as for me, I'm focused on the renewable energy, and particularly bioenergy, where I look at development and integration of the bioenergy industry technologies in the country.
I guess you're the right person for this discussion. Pardon?
Come again?
I guess you're the right person for this discussion.
Sure.
Exactly. So, first of all, what is the state of Africa's energy sector and our energy policy? What is our state in these sectors?
I think apparently when you look at the energy sector in Africa, like I said, the energy is something broad. But when someone talks about energy in general in Africa, you are looking at starting from the individual grassroots, the people, what are they using at household level? You are looking at what are the people's primary energy needs, and what are how is the energy driving the economy? Because you realize that without energy, you're going to have a slow pace as far as the economic development is concerned of any country. So I'll start by saying that in Africa in general, we are still lagging behind as far as energy infrastructure development is concerned. And because of this, you realize that quite a number of people are still lacking access to energy. And apparently, especially when you look at the sub-Saharan Africa, globally it has been ranked as the least as far as energy growth is concerned. And if I may go into the actual statistics and looking back in the past, you realize that the sub-Saharan Africa, where most of us are located, for example, I'm in Uganda, and that's where I am. In 2002, I think the annual consumption was in the tune of 400 kilowatt hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it was around 400 kilowatt hours. And of course, that's where policies came in, because looking at that low consumption rate annually, and looking at the fact that energy is really required for the economic development of especially the African economies to meet or to balance with the rest of the world, or the developing world. So many strategies which came in. Okay, there are so many strategies which came in, and of course all of them were looking at how can we be able to increase the access rate of the electricity to the rest of the world, the African continent, looking at that low rate. So since then, so many policies have come up. You realize that so many countries in Africa have really come up with the different strategies and what I can call the energy policies, which were geared towards making sure that at least our country gets away from the energy poverty, which really was a problem. And in so doing, you realize that if you look at the trends, there's a steady progress as far as the electrification of the African, especially the sub-Saharan, is concerned.
We all know that energy is a significant factor to the growth of a country, right? So
Sure.
how are you going to explain the importance of energy to the agriculture sector and then the industry sector and other services?
Yeah, thank you for, actually that is a very good question. Looking at the fact that Africa actually is, I should say, privileged to be a hub for actually most of the fertile. It is endowed with quite a number of areas with fertile lands, especially looking at the sub-Saharan and the tropical regions of Africa. And that has meant that most of these countries, that's going to be the backbone. I mean, Africa, most of the Africans, where we are going to get away from poverty is through agriculture.
Yeah.
So it means that energy, because like I said, energy in Africa, how it's going to help everyone is by making use of it in what we call the productive use. How are you going to make sure that the grassroots level individual in the village, in the urban, or in the peri-urban area is able to benefit from the electrification of the African continent?
Mm-hmm.
So this is through looking at the areas or sectors which are able to touch the very low person in the rural area. And that sector is agriculture, because it's not it's a sector which requires a lot of foreign investment. It is something where most of us have access, because the land policies are still open, especially in most of the countries. We still have a lot of open fields.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that if we integrate energy into the productive use, especially in the agriculture, through powering agriculture, it's going to help us be able to, first of all, increase production, be more efficient, and at the end of the day, we're going to have a number of people coming onto board, because we are going to have the energy being able to power the production units. Looking at, for example, if you look at the number of people losing milk, they are evening milk where they are not taking it for the next day because of lack of access to electricity. If we can have electricity on top of trying to push the access, because apparently the access rate, I think, is between 42 to 43%. In Africa is around 43 in general, then sub-Saharan Africa is still at 42%, which is quite low compared to the rest of the world. But if we are to push this, that means how are you going to push it to reach people when they are not going to use it productively? So make sure, get a sector, for example, agriculture, teach people how to use the electricity for productive use. For example, looking into things like refrigeration of milk, probably the powering machinery, and so on. That means they're going to be helping the grassroots individual to not only be able to get out of the electricity, but also to be able to sustainably afford it. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have an income from their productive use to be able to afford the what? The electricity. And at the end of the day, we are going to attract foreign investment in the electricity sector, because at the end of the day, we are going to have the tariff lower, because as we have more people coming on board to use electricity productively, that means it's going to call for more investment in that regard.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Ronnie, can you tell us Africa's annual energy consumption per kilowatts?
Africa's annual energy consumption?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, annual consumption, apparently we have reached around we are at 518 kilowatt hours.
518 kilowatts.
Kilowatt hours.
Okay.
Annually. Wow. It has grown steadily from looking at back in 2002 or 2003, where it was approximately 441 kilowatt hours. So it has grown steadily up to that level.
And obviously, if I ask you this same question next year, the numbers are going to increase, right?
Yeah, sure, the numbers are going to increase. But remember, the increase in the numbers, you have to base them at the same time at the population growth rate. Because remember, the African population growth rate, I think, is among the fastest growing in the whole of the world. And I think we need to go down in detail, and because looking at the consumption rate annually, without knowing where this growth is coming from, and be able to match the rate of population growth to the rate of the energy consumption. So we need to get the factual figures of how much is consumed vis-a-vis, so that we are sure, and that one will help us be able to effectively invest in infrastructure, knowing the demand side of the line effectively.
Would you agree with me that Africa is endowed with natural resources that we can adopt as renewables, as energy renewables?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so what are some of these alternatives that we can adopt to contribute to Africa's development?
in terms of the
in terms of renewable energy. Yeah.
In terms of renewable, yeah, actually Africa actually is, like I said at the beginning, that we are still privileged to be enjoying quite a number of natural resources, starting from the fertile lands, going to actually the renewable sources. The whole of Africa, starting from the northern Africa to the southern Africa, through the central, you realize that each of those parts of Africa have got a predominant natural resource. And you realize that for each of those regions, for example, in the northern region, you realize they have quite a number of fossil reserves, fossil oils and gas reserves, but mainly fossil oils. And that has actually led to the primary or dominant energy resource as far as developing their electricity supply is concerned. So you realize that people in the northern region are actually getting their electricity from burning the what? The fossils. Then when you go through the sub-Saharan and the East African region, where we see around for example, in the Central Africa, where we have so many rivers, you see that there people are harnessing their energy from the hydro, and the hydroelectricity there is the predominant form of electricity. Going down to the southern part of Africa, Zimbabwe, and so on, there we have quite a number of mineral deposits in form of coal, and they have really done well in harnessing the electricity from that mineral. So in general, I can say that different parts of Africa are endowed with a predominant, I should say predominant. It doesn't mean that in South Africa there is no hydro or there is no biomass, but we are looking at what predominates that area. And the predominant in most cases is gonna be the one to generate the highest percentage of electricity in that particular region. Going down to the East African region, especially countries along the Rift Valley, of recent we have seen a lot of research being done as far as the potential for geothermal is concerned. And I think in the whole of Africa, Kenya is doing very well in the geothermal production, and a lot of research is going on. And already they have got plants there's a plant already in operation, and moving along to the Ethiopia, already there's a lot of research and major projects are taking place in the geothermal. It's a new technology, but already even the government of Uganda, through the draft energy policy of 2019, already they are looking at putting a lot of investment as far as geothermal infrastructure development is concerned. So in general, Africa, you are going to realize that the general renewable energy technologies, which are key, starting from the solar, going to the wind, going to hydro, biomass, and the rest of the geothermal resources, you realize that they are equally spread out throughout the African continent. And I should say that we are really privileged to have all those different resources. And what we are remaining with is how do we be able to tap from them effectively and efficiently so that the African poverty, as far as energy is concerned, can be met with ease. And this is going to call for different parties from the government, from the private sector, and the international world to come and help us be able to really effectively harness these different resources. In a nutshell, if I may answer your question, is that we are really still rich, but with very little capacity tapped. So if you go into looking at the different records, you realize that as much as we have all those different resources, very little has been tapped as of now. For example, if you look at the wind resource, which is estimated at around 110 gigawatts. Only a small percentage has been yeah, for obvious reasons, because that some parts don't have the access, because most of the wind resources are on the coastal parts of the African continent, like on the coast of Kenya, South Africa, the coastal region, and the landlocked countries somewhat deprived of that resource. But in general, we have not really tapped enough into the rich resources we have in Africa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Ronnie, we'll go for a break, and then when we come back, we shall move to the challenges.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, we are going for a quick break, and when we come back, we will still continue with the discussion. You're welcome back from the break. This is still AAU Talks, and we are discussing renewable energy for Africa's development. Before we went for the break, we identified some alternative energy sources that we can tap for the development of Africa. Let's continue from there. Mr. Ronnie, if you are there, can you please continue?
Yeah, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you too. We've already identified some alternatives that we can tap, using your word, we can tap as renewable energy. And then before you are going to tap into such things, or before something will be implemented, you are surely going to face some challenges. And in Africa, when we talk about challenges, we are talking about technology, we are talking about funding, and then we are talking about our policy. So what are some of these challenges in these categories?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the challenges range from a number of different, what I can categorize them into different areas. One, what we call technological challenges. Then we have what like you said, financial challenges.
Exactly.
And the policy comes in. So the infrastructure, the technology, the technological challenges, of course, look at the infrastructure. Because you realize that if we are to make sure that all these renewable energies are disseminated to the different parts of the Africa or into the individual African countries, you realize that the topography of most of these areas is unique. And this has led to the uniqueness in as far as the development of the infrastructure is concerned. So if you are to make sure that people have access to for example, the national grid, which is already existing, how are you going to make sure that you connect all of them to be able to access the electricity? So you realize that people far away or who cannot even access it, for example, if you look at an area where you have a lot of impenetrable areas like lakes and forests, where literally it's impossible to, integrate a power line, that means you're going to have problems. So technical factor at the end of the day hinders development of this technology. In that, as well, however much we have the investment ready, but if the technology is not there to reach the far area or the far people in the rural areas, that means you're going to have what? Problems. Then the other challenge is, like we said, when we're looking at where electricity can be employed, you realize that most of the people you want to have access to the electricity are poor people in the far rural areas, where literally they have not been inducted on really how productively they can use this electricity. So at the end of the day, we're going to have trouble them meeting the tariff which has been imposed on the electricity. So if you don't meet the challenge of probably putting in place different measures so that they can really use the electricity productively, you are still having challenges of disseminating the electricity to 5 years. And then we bring in the issue of finance. Finance is still a challenge because, like, most of the policies are promoting what we call independent power producers to come on board because of the governments. Most of the African countries have been constrained on meeting the energy demand. So many independent power producers are coming on board to help different governments be able to push this electricity. But realize again, we are having problems as far as financing these projects is concerned. Most of these are new companies coming on board, and however much they have, they are good models, energy models, and of course they have identified the areas where they can really invest in the different technologies. We are still having problems with finance. So unless that is met, we are still having challenges. Of course, the government has brought in the partnerships, what we call the public-private partnerships, where governments are working with the private players. But at the end of that day, the rate is still low, and I think they need to be able to push it further, and the implementation should be positive so that really something is.
So, Mr. Ronnie, what are some of the measures that we can put in place to overcome these challenges, especially in the technology sector?
Sure. I think the overall measure should be beginning with policy development, the policy development issues, because at the end of the day, the policy is going to be able to draw a guideline for all the different challenges that are laid out. Because if you start from, for example, the infrastructure, the unreliable infrastructure, of course, starting from the generation units, then you go to the transmission units, then to the distribution. If we can have a thorough policy whereby there's a lot of support, especially for the IPP, the independent power producers, starting right from the generation, the distribution points. If we can have a thorough guide on how they can be supported, then we are not going to have trouble, because we need to have policies which are going to protect these entities from, exploitation of their infrastructure. They should be given priority over any other, they should be given priority as far as protecting their infrastructure in general. Okay? So then we bring in the financial point of where we need the government, or again through the policy framework, to provide incentives to especially the small power producers, because now this is the answer to a thorough dissemination of these programs to the wider area remaining to have access to electricity. So if they can be supported, especially as far as starting to probably the tax levied on the equipment, then we are going to have a lot of attraction in as far as different people coming on board to have electricity disseminated to the rest of the African areas where access is still low.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how can higher education institutions play a role in this initiative?
Higher education actually
Yeah.
is key. Higher education is key to making sure that actually the energy penetrates the wider area, because starting from the research needed, because we still have a lot of gaps as far as the actual areas where new technologies should be deployed, because quite a number of areas are still having conventional, technologies. But if the higher institutions come on board and bring on board probably programs which are going to help scientists and researchers, especially in the energy sector, to move forward and make sure that a lot of emphasis is put on the energy education, then we are going to have, I think, a higher rate of, first of all, people getting the awareness about the need for the energy, where we are standing as Africa, as far as the energy poverty is concerned. And literally, this is the role of the higher education.
Exactly.
Because through education, that's where knowledge is disseminated to the different people who don't know what's happening. So I think it is key for the higher education to come on board. Of course, through bringing in different initiatives. Already in, for example, in the East African region, we have got a number of programs which are helping the energy awareness, of course, through the higher institutions. We have what we call the East African Center of Research for Energy and Energy Efficiency, which now, of course, has helped quite a number of individuals to gain access to scholarships, and these scholarships are geared towards having higher education in the energy. Okay, and this higher education ranging from probably master's programs, PhD programs, to help people really do a lot of research, develop new technologies, so that at least we have cheap technology in Africa, which can help us disseminate it easily, and people get it at lower costs. Yeah. So this is the role of the education sector in Africa. So we need the education sector to bring on board new institutes, new research institutes, which probably can be regional. For example, you can have the Western Institutes for Research in probably Renewable Energy, you can have the Northern Institute, we can have the Central or East African and the South African Institute. So if these institutes can come on board, and probably they are managed by a single body whose mandate is to make sure that once we develop the different regions, the Northern region, the Western, the East African, and the South African region, at the end of the day we come together, find the different challenges, because we are one, and at the end of the day we can be able to meet these challenges as the world. So that is where the education institute comes with.
Thank you, Mr. Ronnie. And in wrapping up, as a renewable energy specialist, kindly give us some recommendations or some last word.
Oh, the recommendation.
Exactly.
Okay. In a nutshell, I should say that the energy sector in the sub-Saharan and all of Africa is still moving at a slow pace. And I think there are quite a number of opportunities, especially for people doing research in the energy development. And my recommendation would be that let the different governments put this as number one priority, starting from, of course, the policy development, which are going to help all the countries in the sub-Saharan Africa to have these resources harnessed up to the highest potential possible. And like I said, this is going to begin from, first of all, the knowledge dissemination, starting from the higher institutions. So my recommendation would be that if we can have that partnership where different institutions can have programs geared towards the development of the energy sector, through probably creating institutes of research, which should be able to come up with new technologies for developing new and cheaper technologies for easy and affordability, then I think we should be having a higher rate of dissemination of electricity to the rest of the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ronnie. It's been a great discussion, and we hope to see you again.